culture with worldviews which once would have been considered inconceivable but are now considered honorable, a small voice cries out in the wilderness. A voice which is unwilling to surrender to the demands or the madness of the woke culture. This voice may be small, and yet it holds great power. Power that cannot be weighed on the scales of a godless culture, but power that will nonetheless stand the test of time, because it is the truth. Welcome, pilgrims, to the Pugnacious Pilgrim Podcast. We are glad you are here with us today, and we are hopeful that you will walk away informed, enriched, and equipped to live as pilgrims in a brave new world.
Well, pilgrims, welcome back to the podcast. We are excited to have you here, excited to be in the studio again. You know, I'm lonely. It's lonely. Elijah's not here with me tonight. I'm sad. A little bit miserable. Not sure what else to say about that. We miss Mike around here. I say that each and every week, and I guess the hope is that at some point in time, maybe he'll show up. And maybe he'll surprise us all, honestly. Maybe, when he does come, even I won't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, that would be awesome. I would love to be able to podcast with Mike again. We miss him. He probably doesn't miss us as much. Otherwise, I think maybe he'd be here. But without further hesitation, I guess I'd just like to say welcome to the show. This is a live show. We stream live each and every week, and we do that because we want you to join us in the conversation. Tonight's conversation is going to be about work. And you know what? Oh my gosh. No way. Dude, where did you come from?
How'd I get here?
I don't know. How did you get here?
1 minute I'm like, up a tower, and now I'm here.
Up the creek without a paddle. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Well, Mike, welcome back to the podcast. How's it feel to be in the orange chair again?
I feel like I'm missing a part of me, The chair feels great, but as far as, how I'm doing.
Well, and that's really just the tip of the ice. No pun intended. But why don't you just go ahead? I mean, break the ice for us, buddy.
Well, I'm out of work right now.
That's a great. So we're talking about work on the day that you're out of work.
Yeah. Well, it's because I was on workers' comp for like a little over a month. I am technically back to work now, and I'm making another job transition to go back to what I was doing before and not climbing towers. And that's because I hurt myself. Here, let me close up.
Not in the Trent Reznor kind of the way.
There he is.
Oh, man, look at that. Smiley faces.
So I had to have part of my finger amputated, which is really great news for a guitar player.
Yeah, on the left hand.
Yeah, so that's something I've been struggling with. I didn't want to say struggling with. I wanted to say overcoming. But, there's no amount of like trying harder that's going to make the part of the finger come back. So I've been doing my best. But yeah, workplace accident. It was on the top of a 400 foot tower, tallest tower I've ever climbed. And my finger went where my finger was not supposed to go, and it didn't come back out. So
now, based on what you told me, and it's bad. So bad as in like, I'm not making light of the fact, but you said it could have been worse. I mean, is that what we're taking some?
Oh yeah. I should have lost my whole finger for sure. I put two and two together, like what was happening, and I like forcefully like ripped my hand out of the thing. And I think it was that forceful rip that actually caused this to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
But if I wouldn't have done that, the whole thing would have gotten sucked in.
Just taken it all
and
in.
Taken off.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, not fun. I had to climb down the tower afterwards. I had asked for rescue and I received a little bit of pushback. So, the adrenaline started kicking in, and I was like, I'm just going to get down there, and then I'll give these guys a piece of my mind, But no, they drove me to the hospital, and I had to spend the night there and have surgery the next day. Not a fun experience. I would not recommend losing part of any of your digits.
Yeah. It's
not fun.
No, I mean, the closest that I've ever come, I got in a fight with a snowblower once, but fortunately I didn't lose any digits. But it's even that experience was not fun. So I mean, we certainly have been thinking and praying for you, and are glad that, I mean, when you said you were doing tower work, I mean, at the time, I think you said at least within the last 5 years or so, that was like one of the most dangerous jobs in America, wasn't it? I mean,
as far as the death count goes. Yeah, and it still is. It's just not recognized as such, because usually, like, for most dangerous jobs, they'll go like deaths per 100,000. But there's just a little over 10,000 people doing this job in America. So, but if you multiply that by 10 to get like a per 100,000 number, it's like the most dangerous is like, what was it? It was like 200 deaths per 100,000. But this one is like 55 per 100,000 or something like that. But I mean, like, that's, I don't know. There's a reason for that, and fortunately, like, the company that I work for is a very safe company. This is actually like the worst accident that's happened in like 10 years, which is great. The other one was a guy got his finger stuck in the other part of the rigging.
Oh man!
And it degloved his finger, but he still had his finger and still has skin on it. They put the skin back on. But so I was at the top of the tower. This other guy, his thing happened at the bottom of the tower with the tugger that pulls on the rope. So yeah. Well,
I'm glad you're here, Mike. We are really glad you're here. Just because we're talking about it, you have a show this weekend with your band, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to like pitch that? Because this is like, it's kind of cool, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I spent a lot of time really worried that like I wouldn't be able to play guitar the same way, and I'll never be able to play guitar the same way, right? But I think this whole thing is going to make me a better guitarist. I'm playing with these 3 fingers, my ring finger, middle finger, and pinky. It's presenting a very unique challenge, but fortunately, I've only have to take like 2 songs off of our set list that I can play a ton of this stuff still. It's way different. I have to pay a lot more attention. I won't be able to like rock out as hard. But yeah, we've got a show Saturday. What's the date? Like
the 18th. Yep.
At Eagles Club in Bloomington, playing from 8:00 p.m. to I think like 1:00 in the morning, maybe. Maybe not that long, but it's gonna be a fun time.
Yeah.
I'm just really grateful that I can still play.
Yes. That certainly was a prayer. Like how I chose to pray is like, obviously keep Mike safe, be with him, give him peace and comfort in this time. But I really was praying that God would, still just allow you to be able to do, what you love, which is play guitar. And that's a passion of yours. And obviously you've used it for a lot of years and have used it for, a lot of good as well, at church and stuff like that. So,
and I'm going to get back into that. Playing guitar and singing at church. That's something I'm really looking forward to with taking my old job back. Yeah, that's going to be really nice.
Well,
I really want to, before we transition fully, I want to say I will have most of the mobility back in my finger, and it was amputated under the fingernail above the knuckle, and I had to beg the orthopedic surgeon to leave that bone because they wanted to amputate down to the knuckle. So I should be able to play guitar again with this finger.
Yes. Just take some time.
It's going to take a long time. Yeah.
Well, you have the skills to make it happen. So I'm glad about that. Would you like to give a shout out to anybody else? I mean, it's been a while since we've talked to you. A lot of cool things have happened in your life since then. Would you like to give a shout out to anybody else by chance?
Well, what do you mean? Are you fishing?
I am fishing. I'm giving you an opportunity. But you don't have to.
Like my girlfriend?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a girlfriend. She's wonderful. Her name is Maeve. She's a wolf biologist, which is pretty cool. So for a little while, we had this thing going where like people would ask like what I do, and they'd be like, "Wow," and they'd ask what she does, and they'd be like, "Wow." It's like, who's got the more interesting job?
Wow factor? Yeah,
yeah,
which is cool. I mean, awesome. She's a wolf gal. She's a wolf girl.
Yeah, and she's amazing. I do not have an ill word to speak about her. I'm very, very grateful to have her in my life.
We've been blessed to see you with her. You guys complement each other very well, and it's really cool to see. So I'm excited for you, happy for you.
I appreciate that.
I guess I just wanted to give you an opportunity to give her a shout out. I don't think you've been able to do that yet on the show.
No, and I definitely feel like a few prayers were answered when she came into my life. So I'm very, very grateful for her.
Well, you've caught us in the middle, Mike, of a series we're doing on America's identity crisis. And really what we're trying to do is, just as we've evaluated the world that we live in, and really more specifically the culture that we live in here in America, because that's our experience. It's very easy to see that people are lost. And I don't just mean spiritually lost, although that is probably the main reason why people are so lost. But we find ourselves really in a pretty extreme identity crisis. And so we want to kind of tackle some of the reasons that we see that, and try to address, what the Bible actually has to say about those things. And so last week we had my son Elijah in with us, and he did a good job, but we want perspective from teenagers, because obviously, they're not only are they the next generation of adults to that are going to have to take ownership of this world, but they see things through, kind of a different lens, different perspective than we do. And so it was just cool to hear from him. And I'm hoping that having his experience, his story, would be able to maybe relate a little bit more to those that are his age or younger. So if you didn't catch last week's episode, I would definitely encourage you to check it out, especially if you have kids and are looking for ways to press in and relate to them, or even encourage them. But tonight we're actually addressing the concept of work. And so we got the guy with probably the most work experience in the last several years. Really, work for a lot of people, Mike, is you say the word and you'll get all kind of mixed reactions.
Yeah.
As a Christian man, how do you look at work?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, because as a Christian man is very different than how I look at it as an earthly man, right? As a Christian man, I look at work as an opportunity to worship, right? It's an opportunity to tell my flesh where it belongs, and to kind of get my head right about why I am doing what I'm doing, right? It's a way I can honor my future family, my present family, and the Lord. And that's how I look at it as a Christian man. Now, how I look at it on a day-to-day basis is a little bit different than that, right? Nobody's perfect, but if it wasn't for my relationship with the Lord, I don't think that I would have been able to climb the towers I was climbing. I mean, if anything, this job had me praying a little bit more often.
Sure, yeah.
They were different prayers, but
it's hard work, man. Mine, thankfully, you gave him kind of a foot in, but our nephew's doing it, Brandon, he's working there too. And, it's hard work. I think what's cool about it, even for him though, too, is that, he didn't have a lot of satisfaction necessarily in the work that he had been doing in the past. And I think there is something to be said, especially for men, for us to be able to work a job that we get that sense of satisfaction, right? Like, climbing a 400-foot tower, like there's very few people in the world that ever will have to really do anything even near that, and that's as hard work as it is. And we're here in Minnesota's climate where it's freezing, right? I mean, you're ground temperatures, well below zero, and you guys are up in the air, with no protection at all.
Yeah.
It's not easy work.
And I've never been up on a tower when it was nice outside, which is something I regret. If this hadn't happened, I'd still be climbing, and I'd be like really looking forward to the summertime. But unfortunately, I just had to get out of it. I mean, I'm just too accident prone, honestly, I think, in general. But before we go down that rabbit hole, how do you feel about work as a Christian man? Like, what would your answer be to that?
Yeah, I think I've grown in my theology on it. I think, growing up in a Christian home, one thing I can say for sure is my dad has an exceptional work ethic. And so he always modeled that for me. And I think because of that, I always, probably worked hard, but I never, I kind of lived under this idea that work was, tied to the curse, you know what I mean? And so I didn't do a lot of really study on work as worship. It was more, because of Adam's sin, God specifically gave him the curse that he did in Genesis 3, which we're going to get
Which
to.
is true.
Yes. But that, I never really thought about the fact that, before the fall, God had put Adam to work, and there was a way that a man could work that was actually tied to how we are called to worship God and honor God.
Yeah. The curse is that the work would hurt.
Yeah, that it would cause sweat. And exactly. So that was helpful for me. I think in the, the latter part of my, Christian journey so far, it's really changed how I look at work, right? Because before, it was kind of just the thing you had to do in order to pay the bills and do the fun stuff that you wanted to. And now it's really like, no, I kind of get the idea that, we're supposed to work as unto the Lord, right? Like that's our call. That's what we see in Ephesians 4, So, I think to answer your question, I think it's shifted. My mindset on work has shifted a great deal, just in the last probably 10 or 15 years, where I just realized, no, work is worship. Work can be worship.
Yeah. I'm still working on that part, honestly.
Yeah.
It's really tough. Like this last job has given me a really interesting perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I went from working a desk job. Like my career path is so weird, right? I went from
things.
I went from going door to door to like working in a corporate environment to working from home to working on towers to now going back to working a desk job from home. Man, I took it for granted.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about this, because from my perspective, I feel like you've done a really good job knowing how to work and to keep motivated and to stay on task and to actually get stuff done when you're at home. Whereas for me, like I've always seen work as just like, oh, why do I have to do this?
Yeah.
And I know what it's for and I know what I can accomplish with it, but it's still, there's some things like in my head that like haven't really connected yet. So I'm really interested to hear your take on it.
Yeah, and I think that'll be a good part of the conversation. I think, some things that I want us definitely to cover, because I know you and I have had this conversation, especially once we moved kind of to working from home. But it was like, how do you stay faithful to the company that's employing you and ensure that you're not guilty of, stealing time or stealing resources or whatever the case may be, when you're getting paid to do a job and there's not necessarily a manager, looking over you.
Yeah.
How do you keep integrity and ensure that you're working as unto the Lord, and not just necessarily kind of skirting responsibilities and getting the job done good enough or whatever. So I think that'll be a fun part of the conversation tonight.
Yeah, for sure.
But I guess we'd love to hear from anyone that's chiming in. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have confusion about work, we would love for you to join us in the conversation. That's one of the reasons that we go live, is because we love to hear from you. We love the feedback from you. It makes the conversation sweeter. We're going to jump into, Genesis. And before we get to Genesis 3, I'd like to, I'm trying to think where God, is it Genesis? I'm not very prepared right now. I was, but we're going to get to 3. But this is Genesis 2, where God created man and woman. And when he did, let's see. Okay, here's Genesis 2:15. So it says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that day that you eat it, you shall surely die. And so here we see, just in this passage, that God took Adam and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it. And so his job was given to him by God. And so it's, work is, like we talked about, work is not a curse. There is a curse that's attached to work. There is a punishment because of sin. But the fact that God gave Adam work before sin entered the equation, at least tells us to some degree that there's a way that we can work that is joyful. There is a way that we can work that is honoring God and worshipful.
Yeah, we can conclude that work is not sinful.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is probably inconvenient for some people.
Yeah. I guess we could probably even infer that to not work may be sinful, right? And I think there's some passages that we'll get into a little bit later.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of passages.
So I think, what we just want to set the foundation, work in and of itself is not sinful. And since it is commanded by God, it's actually the opposite is true, that to not work is actually sinful. And, obviously our culture has different things to say about that. I've been seeing, I follow, I think it's Occupy Democrats or something like that, just for my daily dose of, Lord, give me patience.
Oh man, I can't even do it. I scrolled through it a little bit today, actually. And the first thing I saw, I was like, are these guys serious? And they are.
Yeah, they are. They
serious.
absolutely are. And I think, there's always this thing about work, right? Because for them, very much of their philosophy and ideology on life is tied into Marxism. And, Marxism is about workers, uniting to basically not have to work for the man anymore. And, in essence, really the man whom we work for is God. God is the owner of all things, and God calls the shots. God is sovereign, and God gets to mandate what we do or don't do, right? And so we don't get to stand before God and say, I'm not going to do it unless you give me A, B, C, and D, right? God commands what we do, and we submit to that, and we worship by working as unto the Lord. So those are, I think, important things for us to see. Now, because of the fall, and we'll get to this to kind of set the stage for the rest of the conversation. Because of the fall, God specifically says to Adam in Genesis 3, verses 17 through 19, and to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. That's a pretty big curse.
It sure is. So basically, don't listen to the voices of your wives.
I mean, if we want to infer anything out of that passage, yeah.
I made that joke at a Bible study one time, and somebody quipped back with that's why you're not married. And I was like,
oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I was like, is that why?
Well, then you proceeded to tell them the truth, and they felt a little bit bad, but. So we got a comment from Ron that says, so the very first man who worked was a farmer. I believe so. I mean, God put him in the garden to cultivate, and he was a farmer who was farming what belonged to God. And
a gardener.
A gardener, a farmer. And I think in some ways, whether you're digging holes for a living or typing on computers or whatever, the toil and the hardship of work is there because of the fall. And prior to the fall, work was pure pleasure. Work was pure joy. And I think in some ways, when a man works hard, when a woman works hard, I guess too, but when a man works hard, we get senses of accomplishment, right? Like, so it is a portion of our identity, but I think because of the fall, there's also a tendency there for it to become too much of our identity, right? Like Adam wasn't known first and foremost as a worker. He was first and foremost known as a worshiper. And I think that's kind of what we want to get at tonight is, as it relates to identity, what role is work supposed to play in that?
Oh man, that's such a huge topic, especially for, I feel like, millennials. And well, I shouldn't even make it a generational thing. I was going to say millennials and older, not millennials and younger, because I feel like the older you are, the more likely you are to completely wrap up who you are and what you do. Right? Like Gen Z doesn't care. They're just like, I am who I am and my employer's lucky to have me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, even like millennials, it's like so many people elevate what they do over even like who they are and what they stand for. Like there's no religion, but there are professors. There are bosses.
Yeah.
There are, the pie in the sky positions you wish to occupy. Yeah. There's no communion in baptism, but there's degrees and there's, salaries.
Yeah.
So that's been a point of frustration between like me and some of my friends and stuff like that for the last like 10 years as well.
Yeah. And I think to that point, probably, we've all experienced it where you meet someone new and you're chit-chatting about, typical stuff that you chit-chat about, but it's not very far into that conversation where the question is, what do you do, right? And so the what do you do question is really about, more about identity, right? Because you tell them you're a doctor, or you tell them you're a plumber, or you tell them you're a whatever, and there's an immediate judgment based on that. And I don't say judgment in a necessarily a negative way, but it's almost like, oh geez, I got to tell him I'm this or that, and he's an engineer, he's this,
like your self-worth.
So
like
there's a lot that's tied to that. We got a statement from, or maybe a question and a statement from Bobby, who says jobs which have a clear bringing order to chaos result are the most satisfying. And he's wondering our thoughts on that. It's kind of a statement that he's making. Bringing order to chaos seems, at least to Bobby, to be the most satisfying work. And I kind of, when I think about that question, I don't disagree. In fact, I think because of chaos, I think we are trying to cultivate something, right? God gave us a mandate in creation to take dominion over the earth, right? And so when we see things out of order, I think there certainly is an aspect of life where we want to bring order to what appears to be chaotic, right? And so I can certainly feel what Bobby's saying. I guess for me, right? Like at work, we have a lot of issues, right, that we're trying to solve, right? So people come to us with their problems, and I'm in IT, and we're trying to provide solutions, right? And so in a roundabout way, we're trying to bring, order to what is chaos and simplify things, make it more efficient, make it, more functional, and I think my sense of accomplishment a lot of times is when we see that problem, find a solution for it, and, then there's peace, right? So we're looking for shalom. So I think shalom already existed in the world, obviously, before the fall, but after fall, that's part of what that toil is, right? Is that we're seeing chaos, we're seeing things that aren't the way that they ought to be, and we're trying to make that right a lot of times. How do you feel about that, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think in what Bobby said, it's a very general statement, but it is true. I mean, especially like as a man, having done a bunch of different jobs, I mean, like, there's a certain amount of satisfaction that comes from, being a project manager and seeing a bunch of like different chaotic pieces come together, and then you have a completed project, and then you can move on. But the most satisfying thing I've done for a job to this day is showing up to a job site and seeing a big pile of metal, and then by the end of the week, that pile of metal is a 200-foot tower.
Yeah.
And there's something beautiful about it.
Sure.
Just knowing that it was once a chaotic pile of metal and it is now an ordered structure that can, support its own weight. So in that regard, and framing things too, I mean, being able to take like a pile of wood and turn it into like a chicken coop, which is something I'm going to be doing, which I'm excited about.
Yeah.
You
got 11 chicks at home.
Yeah. Bringing order out of chaos is something I think we're wired to do, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, even if you look at God's design, right, we're image bearers of God, right? And God certainly created out of nothing, right? And so he spoke things into existence. We don't necessarily have that capability unless we're Joel Osteen or,
name and claim it.
But from a very real sense, right, like what you're talking about, right, is you have a pile that you want to turn into something beautiful or something useful. Bobby even said Jesus took raw chaotic material and brought order to it. He made useful what was essentially useless, as his role as a carpenter, right, taking raw material and turning it into something that could be used, right? And so I think inside of the idea of work is this idea of cultivating things, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be tangible material things, right? In fact, as a pastor, I think as a shepherd, you're really trying to cultivate things as well, right? We look at the world, we look at the chaos of a sinful world, and we are trying to bring order. And that order is brought through us bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ with us and trying to transform lives and set people free from the bondage of sin, which creates more chaos, and to bring people into kind of a place of peace, which really ultimately you can see the toil that comes from that, but you can also see the objective in all of it for us to be image bearers of God and kind of what he did just in creation. So it is pretty cool. Someone said it's like building Legos. Why do kids love Legos so much, right? I mean, why do kids love building sandcastles at the beach? I don't. It's just in us, right? That we want to create. We want to be able to build. We want to be able to make order out of chaos. And so I think it's a pretty cool thing to bring up, Bobby, and a great thing to talk about. So you've been an employee on the before you were saved side of the house, right? And now as a Christian man, is there any way as a Christian that you look at work different now than maybe you did before you were saved?
Oh yeah. There's a lot more conviction involved, right? And I'd say that as a result of that conviction, there have been behavioral changes too. Maybe not as many behavioral changes as, should happen. But before, I mean, I didn't care about wasting my time at work. I didn't care about doing a good job. I didn't really care about carrying myself in an honorable way. It was kind of all about me, right? Yeah. And I was like, well, I'm going to do as little work as possible as to not get fired or without getting fired, right? But I also want to get paid as much as I possibly can without, having to work very hard. And now it's different, right? Like I'm not just working for the money and I'm not just working for my employer, like everything that I do. So if I drop the ball, I mean, I have to handle that as a Christian man, right? And own up to it. Yep. There's no lying that can happen. There's you have to hold yourself accountable because you are portraying, you're living life as a follower of Christ. And every single decision that you make in the workplace has to be filtered through that truth.
Yeah. And along those lines, right, I think especially if and when we, proclaim Christ at work, right, like people are watching us, right? And so how we choose to engage with others, how we choose to, respond to a boss that may be pushing us hard, versus, the others in the office who might not have the same conviction or might not have the salvation or might not be set apart like we are. I think it's very important for us to understand that our witness focus at work makes a difference. One thing, I alluded to it before, but my dad, he's a very hard worker. And, one thing I cherish about him is that he doesn't complain. I think when I see sanctification in a man, a lot of times I look to see how much he complains about the job that he has to do. My dad didn't necessarily desire to be an electrician. He had some, life things that happened when he was very young. And because of that, he started a family maybe before he intended to, and he had to do something about it, right? And so he had aspirations of going to school. He came from a family of teachers. I have no idea what my dad desired to do out of the gate, but I know that my dad took his responsibility as a husband and a father very seriously. And because of that, he just went to work, and he worked and did whatever job was necessary in order to pay the bills. And I honestly can't think of one time in my father's life that I've ever heard my dad complain about his job, ever.
Wow.
And he's talked about things that happen at work that are difficult. He's talked, he used to work night shifts. He used to work swing shifts so he could go to trade school and get his education, as an electrician. He worked very hard, but I never heard my dad complain about work. And so for me, that was my foundation as a man, what it meant to be a man was that we work, because work is how we, honor God and honor our family. But we don't murmur, we don't grumble, we don't complain. And so it's really helped me even in my own life to make sure that I'm, I never want my whining to be louder than my worship. That's kind of been my personal motto, is like whatever it is that I'm doing, I want to be very careful that my complaining is not louder than my praise, because people are watching.
Yeah, that's true. And that, even just you saying that, I'm like sitting here convicted, like, man, I should really try to adopt the same thing, because when you're complaining about your work, all you're doing is making your job harder. That's really it. You're making your job harder, and you're making everybody else's job harder because they got to listen to you complain.
Yeah, true. And I think, I look at things, my dad's part of the union now, and he again, we're kind of in a post-union America, and I know a lot of people would probably be mad that I'm saying that, but the unions had their time and their place. We needed it, right? Because there was times where literally people were being worked to death, right? And so I think workers uniting to get fair treatment at work is okay. But what I see a lot of energy nowadays is it all comes down to money, right? And it all comes down to power, and I don't think, not that those things make the world go round, but they're not what we strive for as Christians, right? And so when we have different goals out of the gate, I find that it's very it's pretty easy for me as a Christian man, if I want to look decent at work, right? If you're surrounded by people who are so driven by their career, so driven by their money, so driven by their power, that's going to come out and people are going to be able to see it. If you're driven by the fact that, hey man, I'm glad I have a job and I'm going to work hard because God has provided this for me, and I owe it to God and I owe it to my employer, like you're going to stand out just on that alone, right? And so where I often find myself having trouble is that I don't think I have to work that hard to look decent in the workplace. And sometimes I've just allowed, like, hey, I just want to be better than the next guy so that, at least I look better than that guy. Right.
Yeah.
And I think you alluded to that a little bit. Like, I just want to work hard enough where the boss says, oh man, he's a good worker.
Yeah.
But that's not always enough. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not the kind of motivation that we should rest on. The kind of motivation that we should rest on is, I'm working as unto the Lord. I'm giving this my all, now, because that's what I'm getting paid to do.
Yeah. And when you're an outspoken Christian, whether you like it or not, every single thing that you do is going to be like judged in light of that. Right. So if somebody's not a believer and you say you are a believer and you're like a lousy worker, they're going to be like, oh, well, there's just another hypocrite.
Yeah.
There's
true.
just, a Christian that claims to follow Christ, but is totally fine with, stealing from their employer or not working very hard. And then, how people are, right? You meet one Christian that doesn't pull his weight, and all of a sudden all Christians are lazy. And, now you're misrepresenting Christ, because Christ certainly wasn't lazy. I mean, he carried his cross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he burned his candle, oftentimes at both ends, where he would wake up early just to invest into his time of prayer and his time with the Lord, so that he would be equipped and ready to jump into his day of work and labor. I think that's a good point, right? Like we recognize that we have a huge opportunity as Christians in a secular work world to bring the gospel with us, right? I can tell you firsthand, whether it was time I spent in the Navy or after the Navy and in kind of the, the public arena, people can tell there's a difference, right? And so if we're working as unto the Lord, people are going to be able to see that, and they're going to ask, like, how do you do that, right? And so I think if we have the right frame of mind, we automatically open doors for gospel conversations, because people are going to come and just say, hey, how come this doesn't bother you? How come you're not angry? How come you're not, getting upset like the rest of us? And we get to say, look, dude, whether I like my boss's decision or not, ultimately I don't work for him, right? And so to have that kind of mentality, that kind of stuff, I mean, not that we never care, but we can kind of brush that off, because that's not ultimately our aim. And so people want to know, like, how can you be so peaceful about this when everybody else is so angry?
Yeah, and it's because our peace comes from somewhere else.
Exactly. Yeah, and our identity as well.
Right.
So, I guess we should pull back towards identity. What encouragement would you give Christians, right? Because we talked about it, in the conversations with strangers. They're asking us, what do we do? How do you navigate that as a Christian? Like, how do we own the job that we do and the work that we do and why we do it, and yet also not have it be kind of the utmost importance of our essence and who we are and what our identity is? How do we navigate that, especially in an American culture where it's so rooted in, what is it, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
Yeah.
Like, it's all about, self-made men.
Well, honestly, I'm more interested in your take on this. But if I had to answer that, I would say that each one of us is gifted uniquely by God to do certain things, right? And I do believe that God has planted you where you are right now, to accomplish a certain specific ministry, and maybe God's got something else for you in the future. But at least right now, like where God has you right now, you have a unique opportunity to ministry that nobody else has ever had in the history of like our existence, right? And I do believe that like you should derive your identity from that, right? And in serving Christ, obviously much easier said than done. But yeah, I mean that's what my advice would be, is that you are uniquely gifted to serve and follow Christ through the occupation in which he has placed you.
Yeah, and I like that too. I would agree and affirm that 100%, and I think, one aspect that I would add to that is that, as Christians, we understand that whatever it is that we do, God, like you said, God has given us that opportunity, right? And so we're not, I know a lot of people are, oh, geez, I just want that next rung on the ladder. I just want that, that next promotion, what are we doing with what God has given to us now, right? Because, you think about the parable of the workers or the laborers or whatever, Jesus talked about, there were those that toiled all day long for the money, and then there were those that just came at the end of the day and worked for an hour, and they all got the same wage. And the one that worked all day long was envious and jealous because the other person worked just for an hour and ended up getting the same pay. And the response was, well, why are you upset? We agreed to that wage, right? And I think, again, like, I found myself, I don't want to know what my coworkers make, but at the end of the day, if I can just look at, hey, is God providing for me, right? Like, is this sufficient? Can I put food on the table for my family? Do I have a roof over our heads? Do we have clothes on our body? Am I cared for? Then what am I really motivated by here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because peace comes when we look at the things that God has given to us and have grateful hearts about it. I think bitterness comes, resentment comes, even anxiety comes when we look at what everybody else has and wish that we had that. And so I think about just having a grateful heart, right? My identity is not wrapped into what I do. I think what I do is wrapped into my identity. I am a Christian. I am a man created in God's image, and I bear that image. Mm-hmm. And I have responsibilities to God. I have responsibilities to my family, and I have responsibilities to the world. And so to know that my identity is I'm a Christian, I'm a child of the one true King, then my job is just one component of that versus, a lot of people that I see in the world who aren't Christians, their job is everything to them.
Yeah.
And so that's why so much pressure is on their shoulders, why they're oftentimes not satisfied, and why they get so frustrated about things not going well, or at least the way that they expect. And that's because it's an idol for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's especially in American culture, and again, like I've only been, a few other places throughout the world, but I just see people look at work a lot different. In Italy, work is different. I feel like people work in Italy with a lot more joy, and I think part of it is because they're simply grateful that they're able to provide for their family, and they don't live to work. They work so that they can live and enjoy life.
Yeah, that is a really strange thing that I have noticed as well. And I haven't been able to see it from like the outside looking in, like you have, like actually moving to a different culture and kind of seeing how they operate. But, in my early 20s, I was around a group of people when I was in that pyramid scheme,
mm-hmm.
right? Yeah. Yep.
Should we call it out by name? No, we won't.
You could almost even say I survived a cult.
Yeah,
you could almost say that. But it was a lot of people who just kind of looked at things differently. Like they were people that were on a mission that, like, I mean, they really did want to be like self-employed and like own their own businesses, even if the ways that they were doing it were a little bit shady. But they still had this culture of like being grateful toward the people who are employing you, because you have to understand that those people have like stuck their necks out so you can have a job and so you can put food on the table. So it was kind of like weird going into the corporate environment with that, like being very chipper, being very grateful to my employers, being very grateful to like the small business owner that employed me. And then seeing all my coworkers just talking as much smack as possible. And it's like, dude, if you don't like it here, you can just leave, right? Like nobody's keeping you here. You know that, right? You can go get a job somewhere else if you think it's going to be better somewhere else. But yeah, I don't know if it's just an American thing, but like, I mean, dang, we have like a horrible attitude when it comes to work. And maybe it's just like being anti-authority, which I certainly am, but like, it's just so tough, man.
Yes.
It makes it harder for everyone when you have that bad attitude.
It does. And I think, to your point, like the question is like, dude, why are you here then? Right? Like I wouldn't, I've certainly left jobs because they became something that work isn't supposed to be, right? And so I looked for something elsewhere so that I could have the kind of heart and the right attitude that I'm supposed to as a Christian, right?
Yeah.
And my dad's been at he's been at 2 companies essentially in his adult life, right? So it's a different thing for people now. Like they say, if you stay at a job for more than 3 years, you're there too long, right? But again, I think some of that mentality is that there's no more loyalty, right? And loyalty is one aspect of good character, right? Like good character is loyal. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to be loyal to an unfaithful company, right? That's not what we're trying to promote here. But if we're always looking for that next step, if we're always looking for what I can get out of this versus what I can put into this, I think that creates an environment where nobody is satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, as a Christian, when I enter the workplace, when I feel my coworkers are kind of having bad days or even bad months, and they're just overwhelmed, or it seems to be more grumbling, there's a natural part of me that says, how do we make this better, right? How do I bring peace into this situation? Sometimes that's me saying, look, I'm going to drop what I'm supposed to do, and I'm going to help you for the next 2 hours because I don't like seeing you this upset. And so let's solve that problem together. And what's really interesting is when you press into that, you start to build relationships with people, and you start to see, look, dude, the reason he's so upset, I have a coworker now who one son was tending to a fire in his backyard, and made a dumb choice, but poured gas on it to try and accelerate it. And he burned 75% of his body.
Whoa.
And then within a month, so he's in the hospital with skin grafts, everything, right? And within a month, his other son, and I don't even know the backstory here, but he showed me pictures, had a 9mm exit wound out of his head. So that was either an accidental firearm thing he got shot at, or maybe tried to take his own life. I don't know the details.
Oh my goodness.
But
man.
here is someone that I saw struggling,
Yeah.
and because I saw him struggling, I pressed in to see how I could help him. And it has been an opportunity for me to share hope, for me to share that I'm praying for you, for me to share, he said, I'm not much of a religious man, but this is miraculous that either of his boys are still alive. And I got to press in and say, I am a religious man, and I can tell you right now that God's hand was on those boys, and I'm praying for you, and I'm praying for your family, and it's opened up gospel doors, right? And so I think, again, like, if we're not always focused on what I can get out of this, it gives us an opportunity to really say, we have a mission field at work. We have an identity that we wear that other people that we work with ought to be able to see. And when they see that, we have opportunities to press in and really become the city on the hill and
Right.
salt of the earth, which we're supposed to, the aroma of Christ.
Yeah, I mean, that's really well said. And what's interesting is, I was in the workforce, obviously, before I became a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first became a Christian, I was really cautious to tell people that I was a Christian, because part of me was still embarrassed, right? Like, I was the type of atheist that I was like, oh, Christians are all idiots, and they're like, they're
I've
just
joined their camp.
Yeah, and I was just convinced that they were not like free thinkers, and all of the classic mumbo jumbo, all of the justifications for being arrogant, And then I became a Christian, and like, I kind of wanted to keep it to myself, because I had it in the back of my head that, like, if these people knew I was a Christian, then I'd have to work harder. But fortunately, I got myself out of that situation. Ever since then, it's like, everywhere I go, like, one of the first things I want to do is like let everybody know who I am and whose I am, and what. It's important to establish that as part of your identity. When you're a Christian, your identity should be in Christ, and if your identity is not as a Christian and in Christ, then you really should kind of reconsider why not.
Yeah, no,
Why
that's
not?
a great point.
Yeah.
Ron weighed in and says, as an employee, I strive to be the very best and dedicated. Here's the example that he gave. In 13 years on the job, he's only been late once. I think that's good. I think we should strive to be the best and the most dedicated, not so that we get the accolades, but because that's who God has called us to be, right? We are to be holy as he is holy. And part of holiness is that, we strive to do the very best job that we can, and certainly to be dedicated, right? Because those are character qualities that God has instilled in us. I think when we look at Ephesians 4:28, this is kind of the opposite of well, I guess Paul is calling people that are not working as unto the Lord to do it by saying in verse or Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, he says, "Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need." And I think that that's a portion too of, are we working so that we can hoard? Are we working so we can buy the bigger house, the boat, all the things and the stuff that we want? Or are we working so that we can use what God has given to us faithfully as stewards of that, so that we can extend love and mercy and care to other people?
Yeah.
And I think as a Christian, that's why I get so bent out of shape about, the government coming in and saying, hey, we're going to tax everybody, because I'm like, dude, you shouldn't have to tax people into kindness. You shouldn't have to tax people into charity. Tax is theft. Charity is honorable, right? And so I think, we talked about this before, but Christians are still some of the most charitable people in the world. And it's really those.
They're not some of the most charitable.
Yeah. I mean,
percentage-wise, they are the most
right.
charitable people in the world.
And the ones that you have to shake down are those whose identity is wrapped into, to the dollars that they make and how they get to spend them, versus right. those who are just grateful to have a job and are looking for opportunities to bless other people. And, right. Again, that's an aspect of work that we should understand as well, is that, even though we earn the paycheck that we do, ultimately that belongs to God. So we have a responsibility as Christians to be prayed up and ask God how he desires for us to spend our salary versus, hoarding it for ourselves and, I don't know. Being like the rich young ruler, right? Where, his idol was what he had, right?
Right.
Like, and Jesus called that out. He talked about, all the good things that he had done. And Jesus said, well, there's still one thing that you haven't, go and sell all your possessions and follow me. That's the kind of attitude and heart that we need to have. Not that God wants us to go and sell all our possessions, but that, there would be no possession that's of more value to us than Christ. And that's the same for our job. If God said, hey, I want you to give this job up so you can spend more time doing this, would you be willing to do it? Or is your idol your work,
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, in my situation, it was, obviously it was made abundantly clear that
it's time
I shouldn't be doing that.
Gears.
But
yeah.
I think the biggest toll that taking that job, because for those that don't know, I was on the road Monday through Friday, and I was working 55 to 65 hours a week. And I pretty much had to step away from a lot of my church obligations. Mm-hmm. My scripture reading just went down the tank, because it's when I got home I was tired,
exhausted,
you know what I mean? And when I woke up, I was getting out of bed in the hotel room and going to work, and then I'd come back, crash, and go to bed. Yep. And that's just, I couldn't do it. Maybe I could do it, but I didn't, you know what I mean? And
right. And I think
now I got to redevelop all the habits. And
that should always, if our work, just like anything else, is taking us away from our disciplines, I think it would be of good value for us to ask the question, is this where I'm supposed to be?
Yeah.
Maybe the answer is yes. And you need to, be more diligent. You need to be more faithful. You need to understand what self-sacrifice looks like, right?
Yeah.
But maybe the answer is no, because you're so worn out that you literally have no physical energy to do the things that God has called you to do. Ron said, when I was 21, I worked with young men who cursed often. They knew I was a Christian. As a Lent challenge, I decided to never curse. Those men watched my every word, trying to see if I failed. In 47 years, I don't think I have cursed more than once in a year. Let's see what else he said here.
That's awesome.
People wondered why, if I hit my hand with a hammer, I didn't curse. I would say, oh, shoot, or I wouldn't say, oh, shoot, or nothing. I've learned even when angry not to curse. Praise God. Sometimes we have to be resolved to do that. I can't say that I have measured myself maybe that much. I know, sometimes I still catch myself whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah.
But
construction, I gotta say, like my mouth became foul. But
Yeah.
when this happened, I stayed so calm that the day after, one of the guys on the tower told me that one of the reasons that like the rescue situation wasn't taken so seriously is because I was so calm.
Yeah, you weren't cursing.
Yeah, and then when I had to go into the doctor, and the doctor was like peeling skin off, it was the worst pain I've ever been in my life. And I'm like, gosh, you know, like I'm like trying so hard not to like, and I didn't swear. I mean, you know, a lot of people would say that like gosh is a swear word, but
I mean, you know, one thing that you know,
watch your mouth.
Kind of on that point is like, no matter, you know, I've seen grown men who cuss every other word, but you put them in a situation and they can control it, right? And so I think, you know, one thing maybe to Ron's point is like, hey, just because your coworkers are doing it or whatever, you know that if there was a kid there or someone that, you know, you didn't want to hear you curse, you wouldn't. And so it is a choice a lot of times, and I love that he made a resolution to not do it.
Yeah.
You know, I think again, like, that's not for us to pat ourselves on the back and give ourselves credit for how awesome we are. That's for us to say, look, dude, this mouth belongs to God. I'm going to consecrate this mouth to the Lord, and it's set apart. It's set apart for holy purposes, just like the rest of my body. And so, you know, whether it's my eyes or my ears or my mouth, it belongs to God, and he owns it, and I'm going to use it for him and his glory. You know, we could talk on this, you know, for 2 more hours, but our time has drawn to an end, I guess. I would like to just, you know, punt to you and just ask if you have any kind of closing thoughts. I know that there's tons that we could chew on here. Is there anything pressing that you'd kind of like to add to the conversation in closing?
Yeah, well, from my own, kind of where my head is like, nobody really naturally, I think, really like enjoys having to work for a living, right? At least the flesh doesn't really enjoy it that much. There's a certain part of like masculinity that makes you crave it, but you know, a lot really goes into like, what are you doing? Is it really satisfying you like as a man? Is it satisfying you as a Christian? You know, this and that and the other thing. And it's hard, right? When you find yourself doing a job that's like mundane or really, really tiring or things like that, like it gets easy to start, you know, grumbling, maybe not doing as good of a job, maybe not waking up with the same vigor and motivation as you did before. From experience, what helps with that is just starting the day with scripture and a prayer.
Amen. Yeah.
That, I mean, I haven't been doing that for a long time, but when I did do that, I was more ready for my day. And an exercise. Scripture, prayer, physical exercise. And then, I mean, it was like there was nothing I couldn't do. There was nothing I didn't want to do. I was just ready, you know, mentally prepared. I had done my devotionals and I had said my prayers. So if you're worried about like your relationship with work, like just make sure you're starting your day off right.
Amen. You know, and I guess what I would say, Mike, is that, you know, God has, to your point, called us to live for him. He's called us to, you know, glorify him in all that we do. And so I think one way for sure that we can do that is to work as unto the Lord. And so my challenge to all the listeners tonight, thank you for joining us, but our challenge is, don't let your identity be wrapped in your work. Let your work be wrapped in your identity, which is in Christ. And people are paying attention. People are watching you, and they when they see you as a person of peace in a chaotic environment, they're going to want to know the reason for the hope that you have, and you're going to have an opportunity to share that with them. And so that's our encouragement. We look forward again to the conversation. Mike, in closing, I was supposed to say this, but Bobby said it's good to see you again. He loves you guys. He loves us and our work. And so Bobby's happy to see you back in the saddle again. And so am I.
Happy to be here.
Pilgrims, there's a perishing world out there. Mike, do you remember that still?
Yeah.
All right, you run with it, buddy.
Yeah, all right. There's a perishing world out there, and you must do your part to ensure that they're hearing the truth. God bless you, pilgrims. Stay pugnacious.